Welcome to Magical Books for Kids, a podcast sponsored by Magic Everywhere, Inc., a company based in Florida. Hosted by Michael John Sullivan, this is your place to hear the very best children's stories and an opportunity to get to know your favorite authors. Now, here is Michael John Sullivan.
Welcome to Magical Books for Kids. I'm Michael John Sullivan, and thank you for joining us for another edition of this wonderful podcast, being sponsored by Magic Everywhere Incorporated, a company based in Kissimmee, Florida. We're happy to have author Keely Parrack. She came from the UK to the USA for fun 20 years ago. And guess what? Keely is still here. And she's liked it so much. And she loves the best as far as writing poetry, picture books, young adult novels, and motivating kids to love reading and to be confident, creative writers. As a freelance writer, her work has been published in the Christian Science Monitor, the Contra Costa Times, Patch, Spider Magazine, and Mothering.com. And her short story, Listening to the Leaves, appears in the anthology, Simple Pleasures of Friendship, Celebrating the Ones We Love. Previously, she's been a science and language arts specialist and class teacher at the elementary school in inner city Nottingham, UK, a child center director in San Francisco, and the co-regional advisor for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, San Francisco North and East Bay. Parrack now fills her time working on picture books and young adult novels, walking in nature, taking photos, and designing hand-printed cards for her friends and family. She currently lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband, son, and of course, a very demanding cat. Keely, welcome to Magical Books for Kids. You've done so much. I know in your bio you had said you didn't always want to be a writer, but I think you've been writing since you were a little toddler, it appears.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Yeah, I've always written, but I never saw myself as a writer, which is kind of crazy. So I remember the first poem I wrote, I think my mum has it somewhere when I was 6, about a mouse. And then I've just always written poetry as kind of way of getting my thoughts together, especially like as a teenager, keeping journals full of angst-ridden poems. And then when I was at school, I was not great at school, but I was known in my school for writing the best stories. And they were quite dark, bizarre stories, I think, but I never saw that as, oh, I could be a writer. I just saw that as something I did. And then when I moved to San Francisco, when I first moved here with my husband, I wasn't allowed to work because of the kind of visa I had. So I spent a lot of time writing poetry, and I ended up being a runner-up at the Dallas Poetry Contest and got to perform, and that was like, ta-da! And then I wrote for a magazine called Bitter that was based in San Antonio, and that was like reviewing CDs and going to bands and stuff. And then I actually got a job back into child teaching and early childhood education, which I love teaching kids. So I kind of forgot all about the writing. And then I had a son, and that was amazing. And then I would read to him all the time. I have a picture of when he was 6 weeks old, sharing an Eric Carle book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. So we've been reading together forever. And then when he was about 1 or 2, I suddenly thought, it kind of came together like, oh, I have a kid who loves reading. I love reading. I'm very passionate about arts and language and creativity and imagination with kids. And it was like, I've written all this time and never put it together that, oh, maybe, maybe I could write for kids. So that's how it all started, really.
Did your son have a favorite book? I know when we were reading to our daughters, that was way back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. They had a favorite book. It was called If You Give a Pig a Pancake or If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. And they were so enthralled that you could actually give a mouse a cookie and they would be happy. So you let them use their imaginations. And I think that's where, our daughters became uh, using their imaginations in many different ways. And you mentioned writing. Sometimes we're very hard on ourselves. We don't think of ourselves as writer. And when I wrote my first book, my first novel, and it was published by Simon and Schuster, I still didn't feel that I was an author for some odd reason, and I think that's because we're so hard on ourselves. If we don't sell a million books, right, we're like thinking, well, we're not really a writer or an author or anything. So I think we're kind of tough, don't you think? We're tough on ourselves.
Absolutely. And that's something, being the regional advisor for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators really showed me that so many people are amazing writers, and it just takes like luck and timing and serendipity, and sometimes you get your shot at the right time, and sometimes it takes a lot longer, but that doesn't mean that you're not a writer because you're not published. So yeah, it's I totally agree, we're really tough on ourselves, and then once you do have a book, you're still like, but is it doing enough, and when is my next book? It's like every step we're hard on ourselves.
Right. And we have to be
Right.
marketers. Yeah, we have to be marketers. And if we're not getting enough sales, we feel like we may be letting down a publisher or something like that. So we sort of like go through that whole build process.
I totally agree. And when I got my deal, I was so excited. And then the build up to, your first book, this, and then of course it came out just after lockdown. So
Right. Which is really, really tough. Now, the book that you're talking about, right, is called Morning Sunshine.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and go through the process. How did that idea, first of all, come about? Was there anything in particular or a message that you wanted to convey to the readers and the children that read it?
So so Morning Sunshine is a book told in haiku. So on one side is a haiku, and on the other side is the nonfiction about the haiku. And it takes place from dawn, or just before dawn, to sunrise. So it's a really tiny amount of time. And it started because I was actually waiting for an agent to respond to me on a young adult novel that I'd sent her. So it was that kind of time where you don't really want to dive into something long that you're working on. You just kind of want to be occupied though. And I was sitting out on my front porch, and I don't know, maybe if it's because I've come from a different country, but I look around at the wildlife here and see hummingbirds and things and think, wow, that's really amazing. And I just really noticed all of the wildlife around me. And then from being a teacher and teaching young kids, I know how kids can be so fascinated and be so in the moment and really notice things. And there's a kind of magic in really noticing the animals and nature around us, kind of carrying on around us. So originally it started as this idea that I would go from dawn to dusk, because it sounds nice as well. Dawn to dusk has a nice kind of flow to it. And I started writing all these haiku. And then I had a conversation with an editor at Random House, and he said, because haiku is so tiny, why don't you concentrate on a tiny amount of time? Which I felt was a great idea. So I reduced the time down, so it was just dawn to sunrise. And then that's how the book came about. And then it's so fascinating learning about animals and facts and things. I really wanted to incorporate a nonfiction element into it as well. So for that, I tried to focus on the questions that the nature haiku raised. So for example, it starts off with the birds singing the dawn chorus, and it's like, well, why do birds do that? And what are they doing? And what are they saying? And why do they act this way? So then I found out about that. And the hardest part was reducing the research, because it's so easy to go down the research rabbit hole and just be, right, that's really fascinating, and that's really fascinating, and want to tell everything, which would be totally overwhelming. But that was such a fun thing to do. And then at the end, I did a glossary, because I found out some like great words that I didn't even know, like crepuscular, which I just love, which means animals that are most active at dawn or dusk. And then I put a how-to haiku in there, just so it's like a whole package.
And so that sort of like gave an educational bent to your particular project as well. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and so mm, when you read the book to your son, what was his reaction?
Oh, it was really lovely, actually. So my son is now 20.
So I
He
now
loves,
understand. My daughters are
yeah.
27 and 23. My goodness.
But
Yes.
I'm so happy. He's still a really big reader, and he's so proud and so happy about the book. He loves the book. Um, and because of this COVID year and lockdown and everything that happened, my book came out March 24th, and around April, I was saying to him, "Oh, too bad you won't be able to be at the book launch," because I was planning this big book launch. And then we ended
Geez,
up
you
having
have
to,
some timing, do you? I mean,
yeah, it was.
March 24th, you just right on the button there. You did it.
I was like, yes, that's great. We ended up having to race up to his college in Portland to bring him home because all the colleges shut down. So he was home. So he was amazing, actually. We did a Facebook Live launch instead. And he helped me like figure out all the sets and everything. And he was my
Oh,
camera person.
so he's perfect that he was home, right? Yes.
Yeah, it was
Mm.
great that he was home. So he taught me a lot about the tech and which way around to do the video and all that kind of thing. So yeah, he was really, really happy for me.
And so, what was the reaction to the book itself when the publisher took a look at it?
Oh, it was really great. The whole experience was so funny because so I used to be the regional advisor for SCBWI, and I would help put conferences and things on and small conferences. And how it happened was completely really serendipity. An editor from North Atlantic contacted me and said that they wanted to start doing more nonfiction picture books. Could she come and do a presentation? And I was like, that would be great. What kind of books, what kind of nonfiction books are you looking for? And I half jokingly said to her, because I know this is such a niche kind of area, would you be looking for a nonfiction book told in haiku that takes place from dawn to sunrise? And she said, that sounds awesome. Send it to me. So I did. And I got a phone call a few weeks later saying that they really loved it, that she was taking it to acquisitions. And we had a talk because at the time it was kind of set in a suburban garden, and they wanted to know if I was open to it being in the cities. And then, I really, really believe in trying to reach all kids in all situations and feeling like every kid can find something in this book. So we decided it would be best if it was in rural and suburban and urban settings so that every kid knew that they were involved in this and
Right.
reaching out to them all. So that was the only thing. So once we agreed on that, then she took it to acquisitions and they said yes. And then we just had a great time working on it. And because I was their first illustrator author, I was really lucky and got a lot of say in who the illustrator was going to be and what the fonts would look like and the layout and everything. And it was just a really amazing experience.
And you mentioned, of course, your son being involved with you. I think that probably gave it a little bit extra zip too. We made some memories with the Facebook Live. How was the Facebook Live? This is an area, of course, authors, aspiring authors, whether you're a new author, even authors that have quite established now utilize Facebook Live. We're certainly going to do it too down the road with our books. But this is something that, I'm a boomer here.
It's all you.
Technology thing. And like, you got the millennials, my daughters, who laugh at me and say, yeah, right. How are you going to do that, Dad? So how did you, I mean, it was great that your son was there to help you. How was the response? How did you feel? Did you feel comfortable doing it or?
I did feel really comfortable doing it. I think I'm lucky because of the RA experience of having to like stand up and present and introduce people and that. So I wasn't worried about that. I also work for my local indie bookstore. So they were like friends. It was like doing it for friends. It was interesting. And so when lockdown happened, I remember loads of people were really saying they were bored and they were at home, and I was never busier than I'd ever been. Like March and April just were a whirl, as all the events I planned kind of trickled down, and all the schools were like, maybe you can't do it after all. So I changed everything to being online and virtual. The Facebook thing was great. And so I had 100 people were going to come to my book launch, and of course then they weren't going to come to the book launch, but I ended up having over 800 views on the Facebook launch site. So the thing is, you are going to reach a wider audience, which is amazing. And all my family are in the UK, so, and I have friends all over the world who never would have been able to make the book launch, but they could make their Facebook Live, or they could see it afterwards in their own time zone, which is great. So you can reach a much wider audience, but it doesn't necessarily translate into book sales, you know. Well,
Right.
and as you know, going and launching at a bookstore or bookstore visits don't always translate either. So it's a great way to get the word out and, you know, be able to explain what your book's about and get some excitement going. So that was really great. And then my publishers set me up with a really good interview with one of their other authors. So we had like a chat backwards and forwards on Insta Live. And then there was the Bay Area Book Festival I was going to be in, and that fell apart and went online. And I had a really great conversation with another picture book author. We just kind of went backwards and forwards and had this great conversation about our books. And so it kind of evolved into something different because nobody really knew what they were doing. And one of the things that I loved was I'd set up visits with Powell's bookstore. I was going to be at Powell's in Portland, which is mine and my son. When I go and visit him, we like spend the day in Powell's.
That's a big one. That's a big one nationally, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a great bookstore. And so I was like, yeah, you know, bucket list, I'm going to be at Powell's. And then that wasn't going to happen. So, and there's another really great kids store there called Green Bean Books. They're just amazing people. So I reached out to both of them and said, you know, it's not going to happen, but if you know, maybe, well, first of all, it was like, let's move it to autumn, feeling optimistic. We'll do it live then. And then when that obviously wasn't going to happen, I reached out to them and said I'd seen a lot of bookstores are doing Zoom and, you know, story time that way. So I reached back out and we did that. So it's kind of about changing expectations and just being imaginative and creative and seeing what you can do.
Right.
Another thing, you mentioned the cards that I do for my friends.
Right, and who doesn't like talking about their book, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you've done your whole life, basically. So you're going to talk about your own book, which is just fine.
Yeah. So because of lockdown, in the middle of lockdown, I'm missing friends. I've always made cards for my friends for their birthdays and stuff. So I ended up making this lockdown owl card just for my friends, because a friend of mine had this crazy great horned owl just appear in her garden, like in the middle of the day. And she's like, Keely, you have to come and see this. So we were like, it's amazing. So I ended up making a lockdown owl card for my friends. And then I ended up making that into book plates, you know, just trying to figure out, because I'm not going to be able to.
Yeah, just ways to get the word out there.
Yeah, so that's what I ended up offering bookstores as well that I visited. So.
Okay, so Morning Sunshine. Why don't you read some excerpts from the book, and let's give the audience a chance to hear your book. You know, the book that so many people love.
Okay. So I'm just going to read some of the haiku.
Okay, great. Okay.
Morning Sunshine. It's written by me and illustrated by John Bajette. Morning Sunshine. Birdsong fills the air. Harmonies and melodies welcome in the dawn. Startled moths flutter, searching for safe places to rest before sunrise. Pop up, quiver ears, Cottontails skitter scatter, leaping with delight. Silver paths crisscross, snails and slugs sliver away, seeking damp spaces. A flock of crows takes to the sky, black capes flapping, beaks, cawing. And this is one of my favorite ones coming up. Silent in shadow, a shy-footed, flick-tailed deer steps into morning.
The descriptions are absolutely gorgeous, by the way.
Thank you.
When you're describing it, it's my imagination's going. And of course, that's what makes a great book, when you're listening to the words. And of course, the illustrations are going to give a little bit more umph to it. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know, whoever buys the book, they're going to see that, obviously, because we're doing this on audio, so you can't really see the pictures on it. But the descriptions of the word, I could see, you know, I could see the animals, I could see the scenery and everything, and you know, the dawn and the mist and everything. It's gorgeous. What a gorgeous way of describing a morning.
Thank you.
And as you said, you're different. You're from another country. So when you're outside, you're looking at things. Perhaps maybe some of us who have seen this all our lives, we take it for granted and everything. Certain situations in nature and everything like that. I mean, when I lived on Long Island, there were deer in our front yard all the time, and rabbits and raccoons and fox and things like that. So it's sort of like you got used to it. And then somebody who's never seen that, or comes from the city and they've never seen how it's like this momentous moment for them. And it should be momentous. The way you were describing it, it felt like there was a momentous moment happening and we had to pay attention.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm really glad. Yeah, the animals here are, some of them are the same, like foxes and things, but some of them are really different. And I just love being in nature. So like the poem that I just wrote about the deer, I actually went out and walked early in the morning. It's just scrubland. It's not like I live in the country or anything.
Right.
But I'd heard that there was, you know, that if you get there early before dawn, a friend of mine goes running there and she'd seen a jackrabbit. So that's what I was looking for. But I was walking along a fenced off quarry, and the sun was just rising. And it was really, really quiet. And then there was nothing there. And then suddenly a deer just stepped out of nowhere. It was like, it wasn't there and then it was there. It had just like literally materialized in front of me. And then there was another deer and it was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And I just really want kids to get that. Or anyone who reads it really to get that.
I did. And I was listening to the words and I could, in the description of the deer, was like fabulous. So where would people pick up Morning Sunshine? Is it online? Is it in bookstores? Where can they actually pick it up?
Everywhere that you would get books from. So, you know, the Barnes and Nobles, indie bookstores, Amazon, Pals.
And this is published by, what publisher is this?
Published by North Atlantic Books, okay. But it's distributed by Penguin Random House. So it's very easy to get.
So you're in the big time, basically. That's what you're saying. Your book, well, your Morning Sunshine is big time. You got to say. So do you think of yourself now as an author, that you've gone through this process and that you're in bookstores and you're everywhere?
I do, but actually I was thinking about this morning. One of the really lovely things about being an author for me is, weirdly, it's cycled back round to being able to connect with kids. For me, it's all about the joy that you can bring to kids. And one of the nicest things has been doing, even though it's by Zoom, has been doing Zoom school visits and Zoom books, you know, and actually connecting with kids and talking to kids about poetry and creating and expressing themselves.
So is there another book you have in mind, or would you like to write, or are you writing another book, or do you have any interest in writing another book after Morning Sunshine? It's unfortunate your timing was like, ouch, right in March, right as everything was shutting down for like forever, it seems like. So,
I know.
I mean, it sounds like you're very personable. You would be a perfect person to get out there to the bookstores, to the book clubs and everything. And you have that genuine spirit of loving what you do and loving what you write. And it's obvious from the way you describe those particular pages. So,
Oh, thank you. Well, I do have, I'm always writing, to be honest. So my agent has a finished YA that hopefully is going to go on sub really soon, and a finished book. I did write another book of haiku called Evening Moonlight, and we're seeing if we can find a home for that. And I've just finished writing a book of ocean poems, which is just finished. Is poetry, not just haiku. And I think it's because I love the ocean, and I was missing the ocean so much around October, November time. So I ended up just immersing myself in ocean and writing about the ocean. I live near Monterey Bay. So it's sort of about a wave that starts in open water and comes all the way across all the different kinds of water to the shore. It's called Wave Riders, and it touches every creature. And
that is a fabulous idea. I love that idea. I can't wait to read that one as well.
Thank you.
Well, Keely Parrack, thank you for joining us here at Magical Books for Kids. It was a joy to have you. Morning Sunshine is the book. I highly recommend it after hearing those excerpts on how you described getting up in the morning. And I guess if you read it, you're probably never going to look at the morning again the same way. I think so. You know, I think reaching a child like that, I think that's the way they would think. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been delightful chatting with you.
And I'm Michael John Sullivan for Magical Books for Kids. Join us next week for another edition, sponsored by Magic Everywhere Incorporated, a company based in Kissimmee, Florida. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to Magical Books for Kids, a podcast sponsored by Magic Everywhere INC, a company based in Florida, hosted by Michael John Sullivan. This is your place to hear the very best children's stories and an opportunity to get to know your favorite authors. Join us for another fun storytelling podcast next week.